Hey everyone, Dr. Alex here, and for today we're going to be talking about Canada's new food guide that was just released last week. I'm going to give you some thoughts about it, a little overview about what it actually talks about specifically, 4 things that I would change about it to make it a little bit more optimal, the good, the bad, and thankfully with this edition and this update, not so ugly. So let's get right into it. So if you take a look at the Canada's Food Guide, which you can look up online, it's broken down into an infographic with a plate. Half the plate is represented with fruits and vegetables. A quarter of the plate is represented with food sources of high quality protein. And then another quarter of it is listed as grains. And when you look at these individual food groups, what you're going to see is different types of animal-based and non-animal-based products that you can combine in terms of the protein section. The grains, you see some quinoa, some whole grain bread, some whole grain pasta, and also some what looks like whole grain rice. And then in the fruits and vegetables section, it's recommended consuming half a plate, or half of your plate should be a combination of fruits and vegetables. You see some carrots, some broccoli, strawberries, blueberries, whole green, what looks like spinach, sweet potatoes, peas. And all in all, the infographic I think they've done a really good job of giving a good visual representation of what a really nutritious meal would look like. And I think that for the majority of people, if you were to eat like this every meal, you're going to be satisfying the majority of the needs of the body in terms of what nutrients it requires to be healthy. If you follow this, I think you can be healthy. I think you're going to get the nutrients that your body needs. I do have a couple of quips though with the food guide. I'm going to get to that in a second. The other thing that I think they've done really well is taken a really holistic approach to it. And when they talk in the eating habits section, they talk about things that have good evidence behind them that have an important impact on an important impact on the way we eat that has an effect on our health and our nutrition. So they talk about things of being mindful of your eating habits. We know that in societies like Japan, they have a sentence or a word or saying that to stop eating when you're 80% full, the more mindful you are, the less likely you are to overconsume. They talk about, of course, cooking more often. And when you cook more often, you have more control of the food that enters into your body, enjoying your food, and eating meal with others. And I think these are really big, important principles that are often not discussed and often overlooked, and that nutrition and eating can be really broken down to this monotonous, awful habit where, oh, I gotta eat again, instead of something that we enjoy and that really gives us a lot of fulfillment in our life, rather than, I think, for a lot of people, a lot of anxiety and frustration. And so I really like that holistic approach that the new food guide has taken, and I give a big thumbs up. So if you look through it and you want to follow this and you want to use this as your guide, there's 4 things that I would change. And it's 4 things that we talk about in our Fundamental Fuel curriculum, where we talk about the 11 principles that will guide your eating habits or give you the principles to give the nutrients to your body that it needs, the building blocks on which you are built that actually build you. And the first problem I have with the food guide is the fruits and vegetables section. And my problem with it is not the size of it. I think that if your plate has 50% of that, you're good, but I wouldn't make it 50% fruits and vegetables. I would make it 50% vegetables. The fruit, which does contain nutrients, also contains a lot of simple sugars, which your body does not need. Your body needs the nutrients that come in the vegetables. And if you have room for dessert, that's where I think the fruits should go. Or it should make up a smaller portion of that half plate and not 50%. So change number 1 I would make, half your plate, vegetables, especially leafy greens, broccoli, sweet potatoes, carrots, anything with lots of color, half your plate. The fruits, a smaller portion, or they are dessert, or maybe with breakfast, but definitely not 50% for morning and for night. The other thing that I would change is I would shrink the grain section. Why? Because our body does not require grains in order to survive, period. We actually don't even really require carbohydrates to survive, but that's a point in a discussion for another day. Simply, the grains are not an optimal nutrient source. You can eat other things that contain macronutrients like calories, like carbohydrates and protein, but have more nutrients in them. Grains, even whole grains, are going to be highly processed or more processed, and thus nutrients are taken out of them. So if we're talking about efficiency and you want to be a little bit more optimal, I would shrink that grain section to half of what it is or zero what it is. And that is because you could consume, say, a sweet potato instead of a piece of bread and get much more nutrients out of it for the same number of calories you're going to consume. If you are an athlete, if you are training, the recommendation is to consume more carbs if you train more. But if you are not training that much, if you are trying to stay in a calorie deficit because of your goals, I would shrink that grain section. The other thing that I think should be changed is in some of the recipes where it talks about using canola oil and using margarine. Margarine is garbage. And we know that when we demonize saturated fat, it's not actually in line with what the research tells us. Fats do not make you fat. Saturated fat and unsaturated fat are required by the body in order for it to function properly, in order for us to survive. Whether it is saturated fat or cholesterol, the body needs these ingredients in order to build things. They are building blocks that are essential. And so in some of the recipes, it demonizes saturated fats. It's saying to use low-fat cottage cheese or low-fat yogurt, or to use margarine instead of butter. Don't do that. Use butter, and if you want to be really particular, use a grass-fed butter. It's going to be just a higher quality source. And it is okay to have a higher fat yogurt or cheese in your diet. It is not going to kill you, and in fact, it's going to give you more nutrients, and it tastes more delicious. So that's one thing, the demonization of saturated fats, ignore that. And when it says to use canola oil in any of the recipes, use olive oil or grapeseed oil or avocado oil, a higher quality oil that is going to be more nutrient filled and is going to have more monounsaturated fats. If you want to learn more about that, check out our Fundamental Fuel curriculum. It'll give some of the background. And so that kind of concludes things. I kind of mixed the last 2 points into one, saying that don't demonize saturated fats, and make sure that if you're using any of the recipes that you use the olive oil and the butter and the grapeseed oil instead of what it recommends is margarine and canola oil. I think overall they've done a really, really good job. I think you could do an even better job that might be in line with a higher level of health, and I would recommend reading our Fundamental Fuel curriculum to get some more details, or just make those 4 changes that we talked about today. Otherwise, I hope you guys got some value out of this. I hope you can go check out that Canada Food Guide. I will make sure that it's linked on YouTube and our podcast and our Instagram TV. That's all I've got for you guys today. I hope you have a wonderful week, and bon appetit.